Order. Order. Okay, so it's Tuesday the 3rd of May. This is the Finance, Economic Development, Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Mobile phones to silent, please. If I can go to the agenda, are there any comments from members of the public?
Thank you, Chairman. We haven't received any comments from members of the public.
Great, thank you. Any apologies for absence?
We haven't received any apologies for absence, but just to note that Councillor Phil Dilks and Councillor Richard Dixon-Warren have not yet arrived. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, are there any disclosures of interests or dispensations in the room? Councillor Green.
Yes, Phil must declare an interest being a full-time employee of the Woodland Trust if we come on to the Future High Street Fund, particularly on beautification or greening. I think that directly impacts on my work. So,
okay, thank you. That's noted. Are there any other declarations of interest or dispensations in the room? Okay, I'd like to. Okay, you can declare those at any stage. Item 4, action notes of the joint scrutiny meeting held on the 30th of November 2021. This was carried over from the last meeting to allow members a little bit more time for consideration. Are there any comments on those action notes? Okay, if I can have a proposer for those action notes, please. Councillor Dawson, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Johnson, thank you. All those in favour, this is a true and accurate record of that meeting. Any votes against? And any abstentions? So there's one abstention there, so that is carried as a true and accurate record. Thank you. Moving on, item 5, action notes of the meeting held on the 22nd of February. Any comments on those action notes? Are there any comments in the room? No? Can I have a proposer that was a true and accurate record of that meeting? Councillor Dawson, and a seconder, Councillor Knowles. All those in favour that was a true and accurate record of that meeting? Or any against? And any abstentions?
wasn't present.
2 abstentions, so that is carried as a true and accurate record. Okay, rattling through this, yes. Item 7, Grantham Future High Streets Fund. This is with Councillor Cook. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, we're certainly firing through the agenda today. So I do have a presentation that I'm going to discuss with you all, and obviously I'm joined by Nicola McCoy-Brown, our Director of Growth, and also John Hind, our Head of Economic Development. So in terms of the Future High Streets Fund, so as many of you will be aware, we were awarded £5.56 million back in April of 2021, and we received the first tranche of funding in the June of 2021. We had our programme manager start with us on August 2021. Unfortunately, Alex is not here today, otherwise he would also, well, actually probably be presenting the presentation, which for some of you might be more favourable than me. But we're now 8 months into the delivery phase, and I'm really here today to provide you an update in terms of the progress that has been made to date. Obviously, we've got just less than 2 years left on the programme to be completed by the 31st of March 2024. I think just as a reminder, this was originally supposed to be a 4-year programme, and this was then condensed into 2.5 years. And that's nothing to do with the delay here from us on a local level, but actually from a national government level in terms of the funding that was then sent through to us. If we go on to the next slide then, please, Jordan. So above and on the screen, and we can circulate these slides to you all afterwards, you'll see a map of what I would describe as Grantham Town Centre, and you'll see 4 key areas on this. So point A is the station approach public realm. What's looking there is about the improved pedestrianisation, improved pedestrian and cycling access between Grantham Railway Station and the town centre, down to the Station Road and the 5-arm junction. Area B is the marketplace, so that's public realm improvements to create an open space for events, but also as that focal point for the town. Area C is the strategic site acquisition to enable station approach, that mixed use development stage 1. And then area D is the delivery of a grant programme to support the conversion of unused and underutilised upper floor retail space to residential accommodation.
If I can just interject, Councillor Cook, you may venture into some of the pink paper items today if you just want to let us know if you want to go into private session.
No, so everything on the presentation is all in the public domain, and we're happy to share that with you all.
That's great, thank you.
So in terms of, if you go on to the next slide, please, John. Thank you. So in terms of the station approach in the public realm, so the drawing that you'll see shows the concept design prepared for the future High Street Fund bid. And the aim is to create that user-friendly and coherent pedestrian and cycling link between the railway station and the town centre. And if you think before the pandemic, we were receiving about 1.4 million annual rail users into the town. So improvements and enhancements will be made to the, what I think you could describe as the uninviting 5-arm junction to soften the very hardscape pedestrian route and enable easier navigation to the town centre. I think anybody that drives would probably say this is one of the most complicated junctions, or it certainly looks it when you're in the vehicle and walking on foot, which I have done many a time up to the station. So the Lincolnshire County Council Highways Special Projects team are developing some more detailed designs and reviewing their costings at present. I think in terms of issues that you could say to date on this, obviously it is a third-party delivery. Obviously we've got very strong relationships with the County Council, so we are very confident about that. But 3/4 of it is owned, managed and maintained by LNER in terms of Station Road. So we've had very early engagement with LNER, and they are very supportive of the works and in principle are allowing the County Council to lead the scheme as the Highways Authority. And obviously progress, we've got a progress report coming back to us as a board later on this month, just to keep that as a live area. So if you go on to the next slide. So obviously here you will see the marketplace. And I think for me, the one thing that Grantham has always struggled with is actually where is the town centre? Because quite often a lot of people will say, oh, the town centre is out here on St. Peter's Hill, or is it in the marketplace? And for me, the town centre has always been the marketplace. Just at the moment, it doesn't look and it doesn't feel like it is the centre of that town. So the purpose of this part of the scheme is to raise the level of the highway to the level of the existing heritage slabbed area, to rationalise the street furniture and then some of the clutter that you'll see, which will then create a space that can be used for events and that urban public open space. And the aim, as I've said, is to create as a focal point to be the real heart of Grantham. And I think some of you that have attended some of the Welcome Back Folk Festival, it was great to see that space being used once again. And I believe, albeit I was at a different Christmas light switch on, I think the Christmas light switch on was also in the marketplace last year as well. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see, now this is Boston, and this is what they've done in terms of Boston. So Boston Marketplace represents an example of what Grantham could look like in terms of that open, cohesive and less street clutter. The County Council are supportive of this scheme and have appointed the same project lead designer who is an expert in open space and public realm delivery as part of the project team. So that's just to give you a highlight example of what it could look like. So if you go on to the next slide. So in terms of the draft delivery programme, obviously you'll see the dates that I currently listed on the screen. The public realm projects will be delivered side by side between August and November of 2023. And obviously the design and survey work is about to commence. Then in terms of construction of the projects, the marketplace will be first of summer 23, and we hope that will be completed by December of 2023. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Jordan, we'll talk about the upper floor grants. So I think what you will see across Grantham, and some of you will have noticed this anyways, we do have very good occupancy of retail space in the town. But like a lot of town centres, and it's not just Grantham, there is a lot of vacant space above those units. You've got potentially 2, 3, 4-storey buildings where nothing really happens in them. So for me, it's really important that we can potentially bring forward a scheme that will bring units forward in terms of bringing footfall back into the town centre, but also creating that sort of co-working, co-living space, and actually identifying that some people do want to live in the town centre as a place to live. So at the present time, obviously I think it's on if you go on to the next slide. So obviously the maximum grant level is for 22 new residential units to be created. Prior to the scheme launch, we held discussions with the key property owners in the town to generate the interest in this. The scheme launched in February, and to date we've had 4 expressions of interest which have been received, which, if fulfilled, will deliver the 18 of the 22 units across the town centre. So obviously we've still got a couple there left to identify, but it's really positive to start to see some plans moving forwards. So if you move on to the next slide, you'll see this is the funding decision-making process, and you'll see all the partners along the bottom, from the government to ourselves to Historic England to obviously Invest SK, which is now part of the council, and the Midlands Engine. So an expression of interest process is then followed by a full application. The legal grant award is then made, and owners are required to rent out these properties for a period of, I think it's a minimum of 5 years. And then all the final decisions on the applications will be made by the project board as well. So that's just to give you a concept in terms of what the decision-making process is. You go on to the next slide, Jordan. So look briefly at the station approach. So obviously, I think we all know the businesses that are located on this area, and I think Jewsons have indicated that they would be willing to leave their existing location, but obviously they need an alternative site to be acquired and a new trade counter built for their use. And many of you will be aware, and this predates, I think, most of us, there's that a previous attempt at using a compulsory purchase order using Grantham Growth Point funding in 2012. And that obviously was led by the county council and us as partners. So obviously we need to review that previous attempt at the CPO, and we've now got all that documentation that's being reviewed. I think it is a key development site for the town, in terms of visitors arriving into the town and then the walk down into the station. The review, in terms of reviewing the CPO and estimating a few of the issues, you've got existing use, it's not closed down. So we are obtaining strategic legal advice to examine progressing a CPO, along with ways to strengthen the council's case for a CPO, utilising all the historic information and up-to-date supporting evidence, and also working with our partners as well about identifying an alternative trade counter site in Grantham. I do think this is one of the sites that eventually will need to be developed for the town in order to get a better approach from the station. And I know that's shared by a number of people, but I don't underestimate the challenge on that one either. So if you go on to the next slide, Jordan, thank you. So in terms of SKDC's co-funding for the project, so we're contributing £379,000 to develop events and promote the town. And part of this will fund a new Grantham engagement manager to bring stakeholders together to help support and promote the town. And a group of these stakeholders / shareholders will be brought together to form a town team who can act as champions for the town as a sounding board for proposed new policy and help with the promotion of Grantham as well as supporting events. And the council can direct the group to form task and finish groups to consider different aspects of the town team and the functions that they have within. And obviously, I'm expecting that all of the Grantham district councillors or the charter trustees to be actively engaged in that town team to really help to shape the town, because and we won't get into the town council argument, but obviously in other areas you'd have the engagement with the town council. Here we don't have that, so we're really keen to engage with the charter trustees on this as well. So in terms of the next slide, please, Jordan. In terms of the staffing and governance, obviously we've got a programme manager who's been able to manage the work streams to date. However, with grants now coming online and the focus on the development of the public realm and the Jewsons acquisition, obviously the funding's already been allocated for that programme coordinator. So I think we're out to advert for that to get that person into post as well. In terms of governance, obviously we have a Future High Streets Fund board. And we meet on a regular basis. Obviously, I think we need and we'll continue to engage actively with FEDCO as this committee. Obviously, any key decisions will be made through the relevant authority and the relevant committee in terms of that. And obviously, in terms of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, obviously we've got a 6-monthly reporting mechanism back to them, and also bringing them up to date as and when required. We'll go on to the final slides. So I think, if I can be briefly honest, I think, the 5.56 million for the Future High Street funding is a really positive step for Grantham. I think any type of funding we can get into our town is brilliant. I think we now need to look at, future forms of funding. So some of you will have seen levelling up funding. Now we're a tier 3 area here, so we are not necessarily able to bid for the levelling up funding. But as further bids come down the line, I think Grantham on its own can be that exception site that we can look to bid into. There's obviously the Towns Fund, and obviously any money we can try and leverage in from the government into Grantham is always a positive thing. I think in terms of the Future High Street Fund, if I'm being brutally honest, no, it's not going to fix all the underlying issues in Grantham. I think we all need to be honest about that, but I think it will continue to support the ongoing redevelopment and growth of the town, bring back potentially buildings back into use, particularly the upper floors. And obviously, it's fantastic that we've managed to access this funding and see the progress as it continues to grow forwards. And I know that you, Chairman, and Councillor Rice-Oxley went around the town centre on a tour with our highways officers, future High Street Fund officers, to have a look at the scheme in person. And I'm sure any of the team, including myself, will be happy to walk you all around the town centre and discuss the opportunities that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm minded that some of these numbers are on pink paper, so if we can stick to the public information first, and if you need to go into closed session, we can do that. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation and all the work that's obviously gone into this in the background to get the funding in the first place. That is great news. Can I just clarify, though, obviously as a Grantham Town Council, as a Grantham Ward Councillor, slip there. Can you just clarify a few points? First of all, the boundary where we're looking at the conversion of the properties on the upper floors, the upper floor grants, what determined that? Was that our own rules, or was that actually government rules that in effect it had to stick to the high street? So I'm just mindful there are other areas where we have retail, for example, along London Road, which are excluded from that. So I'd appreciate an understanding of that. Then there's a very basic question, but given the multiple use or purpose of the market square, it's also used by the showground men, of course, at fair time. Will the alterations be able to withstand the weight of those vehicles and the rides that we get in that area? So were issues in the past actually where in fact the changes couldn't cope and we had cracking and some initial issues. I know it's a potentially county issue, but I think it's really important that we clarify that. I'm a bit concerned about the idea, and I'd like your feedback really. I was at some of the workshops that Invest SK did, asking us all what we wanted for our town. And this doesn't actually look like any of the proposals that people came up with on the day. So I'd just appreciate an understanding of what evidence we have to support the changes that are being proposed. Where has it actually come from? That would be really helpful. Was it from those workshops? Was it from other workshops? Was it from something else? Wearing a planning hat for a moment, I am concerned, and having sat on licensing as well, I am concerned that Grantham has one of the busiest night scenes in the county. And that's according to the police. How that will mix with our plans for residential accommodation above the shops. I already am aware of some issues where some of the very small local, I would call it a tiny little pub actually, had people drinking outside, and as a result the business next door, which had residential accommodation above, closed down. And I'd hate to see us ending up with creating a new problem. So how are we going to manage that or enforce that? Or are we going to be very careful where we support these proposals coming forward, that in fact they're not next to a pub, for example, or next to a nightclub, for example? What rules have we got in place to prevent that? If I can move to the area around Morphra, sorry about this, I've got a number of questions here. I can be stopped at any moment. But if I move to the area, the redevelopment of the approach, huge tick in the box. Certainly the pedestrian access is dire at the moment, and it's been something I've been asking for a long time. So that's brilliant that we're looking at that now. I've got a concern around the redevelopment though of this potentially, I have to be careful what I say now because I don't want to tread into pink papers, of that area, in that we also have a desperate need for parking, more parking spaces in Grantham. If we're to get all these extra people in, And that was potentially an obvious site for that. So if not, where will that go? Have we thought about that longer term strategy? If I stop there, thank you.
Okay, so there are 5 questions there. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. I'll start, and then I'm happy to. No, I'm sure John will finesse my responses. So in terms of the living above the retail units, so the government's restrictions and the rules in terms of the scheme were quite centred around the town centre and what that defined area is. Now, I appreciate there are units down on London Road, and if I was speaking really frankly, I think the challenge we have with Grantham is actually the town centre is too big, it's too elongated, and actually what needs to happen is Grantham town centre needs to shrink and actually drive up the quality in a defined area. So London Road to me actually needs to be, we need to see less, retail and other businesses heading out of town. It actually needs to come back into the town centre. That's my personal take on it. But in terms of why the flats are along, and I'll come back onto that, in terms of where they are, is because of what is the town centre. I think it's around the wider Westgate, it's around the High Street, it's around that sort of that area primarily. In terms of the consultation, in terms of with the obviously we've got a meeting coming up with the Showman's Guild. We are consulting with them, just like we do on all the other schemes that might prohibit or cause impact on the Midland Fair or any other events that we do. Obviously the county council are using the same designer. I think Boston had the same challenges in terms of where the road surface was and where the public space was and what weight you could then put onto those. But no, we are factoring that into the decision, so you won't see any difference there with the fair. The proposals that, as I've already said, that I've come up with, effectively we are working within the rules for the scheme that the government has set out in terms of, the feedback that we might have had from the public. Hopefully, some of that has been incorporated, but I appreciate some of it won't be because the government funding won't allow us to do everything. And I'm sure John can feedback on a bit more of that. In terms of the Grantham night scene, so the majority of the changes from the empty units to the residential are along wider Westgate. I would say that, there are, and I know probably John knows this, in Stamford, there are flats along Broad Street. And obviously you've got the Central nightclub, or Willoughby's, I think it's now called. And they are located very close within proximity. They are also quite desirable flats as well. But obviously, if there are any near the nightclub area, I wouldn't probably say Grantham is one of the busiest in the East Midlands, being I have been once or twice, but sorry, you're saying the county? I thought Lincoln had beat us to that.
Sorry,
but,
if I can clarify, it's to do with our extended opening hours, and that's why I raised it really, that our licensing hours are far longer than.
Do you want to put your microphone on if you're speaking? So I think she was just clarifying in terms of hours there. No, Councillor Cook.
But obviously, we can obviously maintain, if we do get applications around the nightclub area, then we do need to probably do noise surveys just to check what the noise levels are inside those units before they are converted, or if they are potentially looking to be converted. I'm not aware of any that are closest to those. In terms of car parking capacity, the only thing I'd say on that is obviously we can get the figures and probably do. I'm not going to advocate car parking review because we've done plenty of those on this committee. It'd be interesting to see the statistics, because obviously up by the station, and bearing in mind it's only it's a 5-minute walk, to be honest. There is a lot of excess parking up in that space at the present time, and obviously LNER are obviously currently looking at the land that they own up there. Obviously we've got other landowners that own car parking up there. One of the car parks is obviously closed because they just don't have the capacity. So I think as part of the scheme, we need to make sure that we've got enough parking in the whole of the town to make sure that it works to support the town centre. And to be honest, my personal view is actually Grantham is quite fortunate in the fact that its parking is actually reasonably close to the town centre. I know people moan to me sometimes about Welham Street. Well, quite frankly, it's only a 2-minute walk to get into the Isaac Newton shopping centre. Perhaps I'll walk a bit quickly. But John, I don't know if you want to come back in on some of those points around the consultation, the location of some of the flats, etc.
Of course, thank you. I think Councillor Cook covered most things off, but what I would say, certainly in terms of the boundaries for the scheme, that was as set by defining the town centre. I think possibly what didn't come through or perhaps could have come through a bit more in this is that the original scheme that we submitted was for more money than this and included a scheme on St Peter's Hill, which I know was part of that original consultation. And then when government came back with a revised figure for us, we had to, through the necessary consultation, remove that element of the scheme to fit with the funding envelope that we were given. So I am conscious there was more put forward in those consultations. Two and a half years ago now, I think, wasn't it? I think in terms of the upper floor conversions, I think the interesting point there is it's something that property owners in the town have always wanted to do, but in their mind, there has always been a viability gap between the cost of doing it and the potential income that they could generate from it. The beauty of this is, and which is the reason that why we've got such a high number already, is the grant that we're providing through this is meeting that viability gap. So actually, it's now far more appealing for existing local property owners to convert units into residential. And it's an interesting one. I mean, we've got the list of where the properties are here, and I'll review those again against where the nightlife is in town. But I think the important thing is to generate a stronger town centre and to create more spend within the local economy. We need more people living in the town. And actually, it's an interesting one in terms of raising the quality of the nighttime offer is something that's really important to us from a Vista economy point of view as much as anything else. And we have an opportunity to do that by having more people living and spending in the town. So it's an interesting one to make sure, yes, where those properties are, they are not affected by the nighttime offer, but actually more property is going to help drive the nighttime offer. So it's an excellent point you raise, and one that we need to keep an eye on exactly where those properties are. And I suppose the only other thing, having walked the town with highways, particularly 5 Bar Junction, just making that, you know, as somebody who's driven into Grantham nearly every day for the last 5 years, you look at it more from a car user's point of view. Actually, from pedestrians' point of view, it's, you know, you come up off the station, where'd you go, how'd you get into town, and actually creating that golden thread from the station into town in a safe, more aesthetically appealing kind of way is a massive part of this scheme. And absolutely, it's something I've walked with the county council, and something that they fully understand that that's what we want to achieve from this.
I will allow a second round of questions. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. It's been a long while since obviously this thing started. A couple of points. One is just asking a bit about the background. I think you mentioned there's 1.4 million rail passengers per annum before COVID. How much of that has recovered as a sort of roughly? It works out that as over 6 days, about 20,000 people a day. Do we have any information about why they were coming into Grantham? What was the reason for people coming into Grantham? Was it for work? Was it for leisure? Was it for business? Just as a thought, where do we have a starting point for this? Where does that fit in? The other question really is, when we first discussed this, I suggested that out of the original document, it didn't mention transport much, and neither does this. You know, so improvements in transport. It won't be long, apparently, before the constituency, the national constituency, will be Grantham and some villages to the south, which would include Bourne. But you can't get from any of those villages to the south into Grantham, even on a straight road. You've got to come on either 2 different roads, or you can't catch a bus. There's no trains. So that even the link to other parts of the future national constituency of Grantham, rather than Grantham and Bourne, is not there. So what is going to be done about trying to encourage people to come into town the only reason coming to town from the south is by car. And you really want people to be able to come into from the south by other means as well, presumably. So comment on that, if you would, please.
Mr. Cook.
No, I think you raise a really interesting point. I mean, I think the only thing I'd say about, because obviously I know the boundary changes aren't perhaps future High Street Fund related. I think, but what we've got to accept is, you know, the parliamentary constituency might be renamed, you know, Grantham and Bourne, but actually the population in the area will still interact in exactly the same way as it did previously. You know, the people in Grantham will still look towards Nottingham. They will still, you know, look towards the south, just like Bourne looks towards Peterborough and probably doesn't look to Lincoln like many places in the county. I think the point you raised in terms of, I mean, in the future High Street Fund bid, this scheme was obviously addressing, you know, the 5 junction. It's addressing the marketplace. I think the next step is really for and it's probably not for us as an authority, but for the county council in terms of active travel and actually how people get to Grantham, but also how they travel around Grantham. So you'll see there was a consultation regarding improvements in cycling and walking and what that may look like, looking at the gyratory system, looking at whether or not, you know, the high street should be one way, you know, and then looking to see how we can encourage further non-car traffic modes. And I know obviously Councillor Green's obviously mentioned about his links to the Woodland Trust. You know, one of my biggest gripes, I think I've said it since the election, is that Grantham is too much of a concrete town for me. You know, we need to reinstill some of the soft landscaping back into the town, especially down the high street where it is just predominantly buildings. We need to start to see street trees, proper street trees that are actually in keeping and the right choice, not just any tree that we've put up in the past. So I think there are improvements. I think in terms of the bus links from particularly Bourne to Grantham, I think they are poor. And it's one of those cycles where it needs subsidy. Obviously, it's probably one more for the county council than us, but there needs to be better travel. But if we can promote, obviously, with any development that we do as a district council, we should be promoting cycling, we should be promoting walking, we should be making it as easy as possible to get around the towns. I know a scheme that I'm involved with in my own ward is about how we can, you know, encourage cycling from Deeping to Bourne. And at the minute, you can get up to Langtoft. There's then nothing between Langtoft and Baston, and then there's nothing between. I think you can then go from Thirlby to Bourne, but it's not linked up enough. So I know that's something Rosemary and I've been looking at. In terms of the commuters, obviously I think we can get the statistics from LNER. I think it is starting to pick back up again. It's certainly not at the pre-pandemic levels. I think there's still a lot of businesses that are not having people back into the office. And a lot of those commuters, I mean, they were commuters basically coming into the town, literally going to the station, jumping on the train off to either London, York, wherever you want to go. And then when they left, it was just literally driving straight out of the town again. So what we need to try and do is encourage them when they get back is actually to make it as easy as possible for them to go into the town centre and enjoy some of the local hostilleries and, you know, go out for something to eat. So anything we can do to try and keep those commuters in the town centre would be really positive. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that one, John.
Only to strengthen that point around, you know, there are 1.4 million people that are coming into Grantham, going up to the station, going about their business and coming back. And, you know, we've got to start capturing some of that traffic back into the town. I mean, you know, you are talking predominantly again, you know, people from the affluent hinterland that use the station, but we're just not getting them into the town. And a big part of this, the Firebar Junction, everything is about just capturing some of that economy and some of that spend back into the town.
Thank you. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine are words of reassurance to Councillor Morgan. I'm the councillor for Stamford. Stamford probably really backs above its weight on a nighttime economy. We have a very large nighttime economy. We also have a very high proportion of people who live in the centre of town. I work. You stick a pin in the centre of Stamford, I stand on that pin. I own a few properties in Stamford. In Red Lion Square, we have a flat. It's never empty. We've got them in St Paul Street. They're never empty. The houses around the town centre are basically, they go on the market on Monday, they're sold on Friday. And I think the thing is that the nighttime economy brings people into the centre of town. They always say if you've got a good nighttime economy, you'll have a good daytime economy. And I think the problem is when you're looking at doing a scheme like this, you can't water it down too much. You've got to pick an area where you can actually achieve something rather than spend a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there. And I think the scheme is to try and attract people of those 1.4 million to stay perhaps originally around the railway station area. You know, you go to London now, the stations have changed dramatically in the last 50 years. You go down there now, they're buzzing, the shops move in and it attracts things. It's a difficult balance, isn't it? It's a chicken and an egg. Where do you start? Which comes first, the people or the people putting in the cafes, the restaurants? And if you put the cafes, the restaurants and you attract people on a retailer, you will attract retailers. And this is the problem that Grantham's got. It needs to build up the critical mass of customers. If you get the critical mass of customers, you will ultimately get the quality shops moving in. And as you get the quality shops going, all your flats will be full and the town will start to buzz again. This is a start. I'm a great cynic, I have to say, because I've been in the sort of business for 46 years and I'm extremely cynical. But I look at this And I used to work in Grantham 50 years ago in Watergate. It has always upset me that they pulled down half of Watergate and they left it as a car park. You know, they ruined what was part of the centre. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sandal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This obviously is a very in-depth report, and they've taken a lot of time and effort. But because I don't live in Stamford, I don't really honestly know all the pros and cons. But what is an improvement is always better for business, for economy, for people. I have two questions. One is why, when you try and desperately to promote your town centre and support it and bring it back to life, are you building a big shopping complex out of town, which has free parking for lots of people? And my other question is, at the beginning of the report, it states the future High Street report supports a council priority of driving growth of our economy, developing the district's 4 town centres, Bourne, Grantham, Market Deeping and Stamford, specifically Grantham. I just wondered why there was no even being a minor amount of funding considered for the other 3 towns. Thank you.
Councillor Cook.
So I think on the final point that Councillor Sandal raises is this scheme was predominantly based on the metrics of the information that we had. So Grantham was the only town that we had in the district that we could bid for funding. It wasn't, Stamford was not eligible in terms of the government scheme for this round of funding. Obviously, some of you will have seen, in terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Funding bid, we were allocated 3.8 million. Now on that, I think we've all been very clear that we want to see that shared equally per population amongst the towns around the district, and then also looking at the rural scheme. So obviously we're working with all of the towns to make sure that they get benefit from that share of funding. But unfortunately on the Future High Street Fund, it was Grantham was the only place that we could bid. In terms of the point you raised about promoting the town centre and then obviously having the out of town shopping centres. Now obviously as a council we've made a planning decision on that. I think the pushback I would give on it though is that the shops that will open in these designer outlet centres will never open in Grantham. You are never going to get the likes of Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, Barber and everybody else open a shop in Grantham Town Centre. These are shopping destinations that people will drive to, they will visit, they will spend their money. And then hopefully if we can retain, and I know the figures in the applications I think was about 10%, but even if we got 1% of that 3.5 million people estimated to come into Grantham, then that would be a fantastic achievement for the hotels, it'd be fantastic for the local shops. But, in terms of what that will do is, that will bring a substantial amount of money and jobs to the area. But actually, you're never going to get the brands that will open in those outlet centres to open in the town centre. And that's why in terms of planning restrictions, we need to be really clear that they are a tier 1, is that right? Tier 1 shopping designer outlet centre, so that we don't end up with the likes of shops that would normally be very interested in opening in the town centre, opening up there, which would then leave empty shop units in the town. So they are very different markets in terms of where they are. But, either scheme, I'm not saying either one, but, potentially have the ability to provide 1,700 jobs to potentially local people and also support £130 million in investment. And I think the point that Councillor Dawson raised in terms of on Watergate and some of the buildings, and I know Councillor Morgan will agree on this, this council probably in the 60s and 70s took criminal decisions on the buildings that they demolished and that they brought down, because you look at some of the Grantham architecture and it is stunning, but then we have some horrible buildings that, quite frankly, I cannot believe this council ever made the decision to pull down and really harm the town centre in terms of what it looks like, which is why with Historic England, we'll be working on the Future High Street. We've been working on the historic shopfront scheme, which is in terms to restore some of those shop fronts and make it look a really pretty place that people want to come and visit.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, it's fantastic that we've won this money and we can start to address some long-standing issues with the town. My first question is, do we have a grasp of the funding's multiplier? So for every pound being spent, in other words, what the projected return would be from that? And then secondly, what we're defining success to be in terms of an uplift in footfall over a certain time frame, say. So if we jump forward to 2033, what do we think that this funding will contribute to the footfall at that point in time? Thank you.
John?
I think in terms of footfall, I'm going to say this, but we're currently getting the stats for now to be able to convert those going forward. I think there isn't a straightforward answer that yes, we've got that, and yes, we know what that is. The multiplier is an interesting one, particularly in terms of the future high street fund. An outcome and an output isn't actually measured on that. It's measured on job creation, it's measured on job safeguarding, it's measured on kind of output you'd expect to see, not necessarily on return on investment. So that's something that we'll pick up. And I think bring into, again, in the corporate plan, in the KPIs, there isn't actually that ROI attached to that. So I think that's definitely something we need to bring into this as a good way of explaining, because this is the first time this has come forward as an explanation of the scheme. So I think suggestions like that are absolutely spot on, and we can play that in. But I think in terms of footfall, it's more about the amount of people that we're going to have living and spending in the town. And that's really where the residential element comes from. It is that will naturally generate footfall, but it's actually how much is that footfall spending in the town? Because if we're creating the residential for people to go up to the station, get the train to London, not spend their money here again, actually we're doing what we should be doing. So really, it's the footfall is about the residential element, because the retail, as Councillor Dawson has said, should follow by the strength of the offer that the town brings by having more people living here. But certainly the return on investment is a point I'll pick up with Alex, and we'll have a look at that. Thank you for that.
Just to add, I think, and I think what would be really good to have this sort of ongoing discussion with FedCo, so to come back in a few months' time with an update as to where we are, and also to provide some more context to Councillor Green's point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have a couple of comments, and then we'll go. So £5,556,042 of new money on Grantham Town Centre. That's got to be celebrated. I mean, these sorts of budgets don't just happen through the power of prayer. I mean, a lot of work goes into preparing those plans, getting the measurements there, building a team, a cross-party team to make that happen. Obviously, there are concerns about reporting and questions that we have about how that's going to be spent. But £5.5 million of new money into the town centre can only be a good thing. It was mentioned before, I did a walking tour with John and his team. I found that very helpful, actually. I'd urge anybody on the committee to reach out to John's team to do that. I had a number of questions for John, and I had a number of points, but I did think it was an interesting approach. I would thoroughly recommend other members of the committee do that. I do have some questions. As I say, some clarity. I mean, on that walking tour, it was explained to me the difference between the Heritage Action Zone and the Future High Streets Fund. I don't think that's very broadly understood. If you could just explain that again, please, because I think that they are different streams of funding attempting to achieve different things. And I don't think that's very widely understood. I think it would be helpful if the committee had a bit more detail, just understanding the difference of those two different sources of money, bringing money and investment back into the town. You mentioned the Future High Streets Fund board. If you just explain to us a little bit who's on that board, please, just so that we sort of know. I mean, most of my concerns, which, as I say, were considerably allayed with the walking tour, were 5.5 million sounds like a lot of money, but how much of it goes on consultants and how much of it goes on stuff for the town centre, and how is that actually reported? Now, inevitably, it's obviously public money has to be controlled in its expenditure. I'd just like to understand that we are monitoring that. I'd like to echo the point made about the lack of trees and soft landscaping in the town centre. That's something that the residents of Grantham St Vincent's have said to me, actually, that they'd like to see more trees and soft landscaping in the town centre. Couple of other points. What actually is the difference between the town centre team? And I know that Grantham's had town centre managers in the past. What's the difference in those things? And a comm strategy. Do we have a comm strategy to engage and involve the community in this? Now, it was explained to me, and perhaps it's worth reiterating again today, that one of the key objectives of that money was to build momentum that will last further than a couple of years. If you can just talk a little bit more about about how you would define the success of that. I think they're the key points here. How do we define the success of how that's spent? And the other thing that was really helpful to me in those conversations I had with you was the parallels, that there are parallels out there. I mean, you mentioned Boston in the marketplace. I found that very helpful. But there are parallels. I think in future reports, it would be interesting to see, in partly relating back to the definitions of success, what parallels we're aspiring to in what we're trying to achieve here. So I think they're questions for John. Thank you.
I think I wrote them all down. You'll have to excuse me if there's one or two I may have missed. I think in terms of how much money is going on the scheme, the 5.56, so when the bid was put together, there was additional funding provided to us by government for that work that was done by consultants. So the 5.56 is money to spend on the programme. It's money to spend on the conversions, it's money to spend on the public highways, albeit through the county council, but not really seeing them as consultants, but seeing them as delivery partners that will obviously receive funding to deliver what they do. In terms of the Future High Street Fund and HAS board, and it's an interesting one, and happy to come back again with a better explanation of HAS to future meetings. The Grantham Heritage Action Zone is £1.2 million to improve the quality of the heritage offer within the town. So if I remember rightly, it can only be spent on buildings that predate 1936. It is about predominantly shopfront improvement schemes. So thank you for your kind words about a walking tour, and absolutely anybody that wants one, we will happily take you on and be able to point out to you retail properties within the town that have already received shopfront improvement. And actually, by working so closely the two schemes together, the perfect storm is the High Street Heritage Action Zone funds the shopfront improvement, and the Future High Street Fund funds the residential of the same property above. And then you're starting to really see some economies of scale about what we're trying to achieve through the two schemes. But very much the difference is one is funded by Heritage England, one is funded by the LUHC, one is looking at the history of the town, and things like the Grantham Trumps cards and promoting the heritage of the town, versus the hard and fast outcomes that are expected from the Future High Street Fund. So the boards, we merged the HAS board and the Future High Street Fund board because of the very close working links between the two. Board members are Councillor Cook, Councillor Stokes, Councillor Trollope-Bellew, and representative from Historic England is also on that board, and then myself and the programme managers responsible for delivering those specific programmes, and the chief executive also sits on that board as well. I think in terms of moving forward, one thing that hasn't come out massively in this, because we're still working it through in terms of the wider partnerships that we're creating, and Alex may have mentioned to you on the tour, London and Continental Railways, who are the British Transport private sector developer. No coincidence that after we received our Future High Street Fund money, LCR came forward, and we're engaged with them now to look at what we can really do at the station with 5.56 versus what you can do with some serious private public sector investment from other government departments. And that particularly plays into parking. So when they're looking at, we're looking at the wider master plan, working with LCR, it's all embryonic at the moment, but there's a lot more that can be done around the station, and the car parks there and there, and as Councillor Cook said, one of them's empty and one's barely used, and actually rationalising those to make more sense, and then see what else we can do because of that. And I think the other thing about London Continental Railways and others are, anybody that has come to the town and looked at the town is very complimentary of the town. And I think that leads to your point about other areas and parallels. People will say, I've just been there. Grantham's got a lot more going for it. It's got a lot more about it than perhaps other places. So actually, as the scheme progresses, we should play out some of those parallels, as you suggest, Chair, and actually promote how strong the offer is now and how much stronger it will be as a result of this funding. And then, Alex will say it, we'll all say it, the trees, the soft landscaping, we need to work with the county when we're doing the public realm works to actually make more of the greenscaping that we need to see as part of that softer landing for anybody who's coming to the town.
Just to
Councillor Cook.
expand on a couple of points. I mean, the point you raised about, it is fantastic that we've got additional income coming into the town. The bid was drafted up, and I thank all of the team involved in that. In terms of aligning with all of the government's requirements of that. I think in terms of the soft landscaping, as an authority, and it's not for this committee, but we need to have a proper street strategy, and excuse Councillor Green, I know who you work for, and I've always said, you go to the station and it says the home of the Woodland Trust. Well, Grantham looks far from the home of the Woodland Trust. If you want it, if it is the home of the Woodland Trust, let's make it look like it and actually, really re-soften up the town centre particularly, which is why we need to work with the county council on their plans for the regeneration of the town centre as well. I think the bit on momentum, as I've mentioned, in terms of, yes, we've got the Future High Street Fund, yes, we've got the HAS funding, we've got the UK Shared Prosperity funding coming next. That's another form of income. But what we need to do is, as you mentioned about in terms of comms, is, and I know I've already invited, I won't say which minister, but I've invited a minister up from DLUC to actually come to Grantham, because when the next round of levelling up funding comes, yes, as a district, we are a tier 3 area, but they need to look at Grantham on its own. And the more information we have in terms of the metrics and what money investment can deliver for Grantham and the wider economic area, actually the better. So actually we should be putting in a bid to the next levelling up round to get that funding that Grantham desperately and quite rightly deserves.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. John, I'd like to make a suggestion. This month we form the new committees for the district. So there might be new members on this committee. I would suggest that perhaps after that you send out an invitation to all the members of the FEDCO to go walk round Grantham with you and introduce everyone to what you're trying to do. Because I personally have never really been round Grantham properly. I've been to the shops and that, but I think it would be a really good idea that then they can vote on what they see and what they understand rather than what they're being told. Thank you.
Councillor Cook.
Madam Bashir, I think just on that, actually, it's probably worthwhile actually extending that invitation to all councillors of the council and actually say to people, to all members, come and have a tour, come and have a discussion about it. Because ultimately, at some point, if this council, we do get into the position where we're putting in a bid for levelling up funding, that will have to come to full council. So why not have all the members have a better understanding of Grantham as a place and what we can do for it?
That's even better.
Okay, I'm just picturing 55 councillors walking around the town there, so we'll need to arrange the road closures for that. Councillor Morgan again. As I say, we've all spoken once here, so I think some of the messages are taken back there. I'll take a couple more comments, then I'll have some closing comments. I'll take a comment from a non-member first. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you. Sorry, I came actually to observe, but I'm very pleased I did. I just feel that this sounds awful, but when I try to, well, I don't try to drive around it because I just get thinking I'm in a pig pen. When you're going round, coming out of under the arches of the railway and getting in, trying to get into those right turns and the right lanes, I find that absolutely crazy. And then when I went to have a look at the people with the doing some singing and what have you for the Ukraine, I had to ask somebody where the market was. I had got a rough idea, but somebody put me right. And the approach to it looked, I'm sorry to say, looked really dirty, dusty, and needed a lot of TLC. It doesn't always make you feel that you want to be here. And that's sad because there's lots of nice things and beautiful architecture and everything else. But I think a lot of cleaning up, tidying up and making life a lot easier is needed. Sorry.
Councillor Cook.
I know a couple of the points you raised there are the county council responsibilities. And I think, for those, particularly visitors that come to the town, the challenges driving around the town centre is difficult. And I think there are improvements that can be made on that. And I know the county council are looking at different options. I think there's probably room for enhanced signage around the town, especially for pedestrians on foot. I think the interesting point you raised about the cleanliness and everything else around the town centre. So under the shared prosperity funding, actually that's primarily based more around revenue spending and not capital. So actually, if part of the scheme that we will develop up with local stakeholders in all of the towns is actually, would you like to spend some of that money actually really doing an enhanced cleaning mechanism of the town centre? Because I know that's been raised with me as well.
I think that feeds into the common strategy here, because there's lots of stuff happening, and I think it's not well understood what the differences are and what their objectives are and the successes there. So I think it feeds into that earlier point. So we've all spoken once. If there are any closing comments, I know that Councillor Morgan wants to make some closing comments, and then we can make some progress. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much. This actually leads rather neatly after what we were just saying. One of the concerns I've got is the county council. And the reason I say that is I was a county councillor here. And the only reason we've got trees at all on St. Catherine's Road is because I stopped them cutting them down because I didn't want to spend money clearing up the leaves. So it is a concern. We do need to ensure that they're buying into. I'm very clear that is our objective. As a matter of interest, historically, Grantham was tree lined on all the High Street and London Road, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And over the years, gradually we took those trees down. That's why we've actually got quite wide pavements, if you notice. It's because there were trees where they are now. So we're really just asking to restore back the green environment that the town once had and still has, as you start moving away into St. Vincent's Wall, certainly into our parks. I think the other point, it's been touched on in the report, but just like a reassurance, we mentioned it, that there will be no detrimental impact on any existing historic architecture for any of the, shall we say, redevelopments that we're looking at, because there are in that area some very precious railway, there's some precious railway history. I know without touching pink papers again, but I know that's of quite high value, actually nationally, and not only locally. What we're not there yet, but when I speak to people repeatedly, things like access to public toilets comes up, and we've been closing those down rather than making them more accessible. So there's a very high dependency still on going into shops, etc., or the cafes to use the toilet, and disabled facilities again. I think an awful lot of work needs to be done in partnership with the county, because a lot of the issues raised, it does look scruffy, I agree. And in fact, my daughter fell in the street right outside on St. Peter's Hill because the paving is dire. When you look at the beautiful paving some of our other towns have got, Grantham's has not been touched for years in the heart of the town. And even, dare I say, when they did the work on Wide Westgate, that is now looking sad. It's rutted, it's damaged. I do think county need to pull up, we need to, have some answers to do, really, some of the issues that I've raised. I'd like to touch on lighting, if I may, because if we are putting this investment into our pedestrian access into town, again, it's county, they need to light it so people feel safe and secure throughout and not have them switch the lights off, which incidentally did happen. So I think I've just touched on some of the key bits, but I think it would be really helpful to have a session on the overall strategy, because this is a part of it, and we've mentioned the historic site. I think I disagree with one area, and I do think that the London Road Parade of Shops is a very important part of town. It's actually part of the conservation area. When we did the St. Anne's conservation area work, we discovered that, and that's a shame that we had to discover it, because you wouldn't believe so looking at it, because it's never been enforced. So all the shop fronts there have not been touched as part of the shop front scheme, but that's the gateway into Grantham if you're coming along the London Road. So thousands of vehicles are seeing plastic Eastern Europe, not that I've got anything wrong with Eastern Europe, I think they're great, they're thriving businesses, But what's happened to those heritage buildings? If you look up, the Victorian Society did research for us, and it's one of the few remaining intact Victorian parades of shops in the entire country, because so many nationally have been fragmented. New modern blocks have gone up in the middle. Not only that, you've got the association of the streets behind with the intact original Victorian housing. That whole area could be an absolute gem and could be a wonderful welcome into our town. So I ask that when we're looking at the shopfront scheme, please do start looking at that area as well. And then last but not least, where we're doing whatever we're doing, we need to be marketing it and think about London and other areas. So we get those people to come to our town. It's got an amazing history. Let's get them in. And we need to enforce what we do. There's no good us spending all this money now, and then in a year or so's time, those shop fronts of, which is what's already happened in the market square with the great big mobility sign that actually had no planning permission, has never been enforced, and completely undoes the historic character of that area. We need to be looking after the work we've already done. Thank you.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. So you've raised quite a few areas there. So in terms of street trees, I didn't know actually that Grantham was all tree lined at one point. I'm sure on old images we'd see that. I think in the past there has been inappropriate planting of certain species of trees in the town centre, which is probably why they've then been pulled up. But quite rightly, if you're removing one, you need to replace it with one. And I always get sick to death whenever you're walking down Wider Westgate, you see these little tree stumps in the ground, and it's like, why haven't we replaced the tree in that area, whether it's ours or counties? Trees along, or greening of the high street or the town centre does massive improvements, not just for the aesthetics, but in terms of air quality, in terms of its proven links with mental health. So I'm a massive supporter of that. Obviously, you mentioned about heritage. I'm passionate about heritage and historic buildings. It's always been an interest of mine. In terms of the railway buildings, absolutely, we don't want to do anything detrimental to that. That's why we did put in a joint bid with the county council about making Grantham the home of British Railways. Now, I don't envisage we're going to win that, but just raising the flag that Grantham has a huge, historic past with railways. You mentioned about Lewes. Obviously, I was delighted that we got £160,000 of funding from the government for the Changing Places scheme. So I met with the Grantham Disabled Children's Society, and they raised about how they cannot change, elderly teens and adults in the town centre because there's nowhere for them to go. So I'm delighted we've got that funding. Obviously, we've got the public loos that have been refurbished in the Guildhall. In terms of lighting and areas, I think obviously it is a point for the county council on that one. For me, I'm all for seeing the restoration of actually some of these ugly aluminium poles actually to this traditional street lighting that you would have seen years ago, and actually is much more in keeping than some of the lighting that we do see around the town. I think the point that you raised about the discussion of Grantham and what we can potentially do, I think we need to replicate that across all of the towns, and also somehow with a forum for the rural areas as well, because we've got this UK shared prosperity funding. I think that's the opportunity to really have that conversation about what do you want the future of the town centre to look like. We only got that announced, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So I think in terms of marketing of the town, as I mentioned earlier, the UK shared prosperity funding is more based around revenue spending, not capital. So it won't be on buildings or projects like that. It needs to be on revenue, which is where some of this can come into. I didn't know about the Victorian Society, and I'd love to see the report on that to learn more about that. But, I still stand by the fact, and as a personal view, and I don't live here, so obviously I give way to the Grantham councillors on this one. The town centre, it is too elongated in its current structure. If you want to drive up quality and that experience, you do need to have a defined area. I think we are getting to that where you've got sort of the leisure culture here, the leisure quarter here, with the cinema, with the art centre. You've then got, the high street and the historic area, but then you've also got the cultural quarter around St. Wolfram's, and some of the architecture and some of the, shops around there are stunning in terms of what there is. But it's hidden. That's the thing, is to get people from the station down to St. Wolfram's, it's not the easiest path. Even with signage, it's not the most visible. And there's an immense amount of history in Grantham that quite often is just hidden.
Thank you. I think you just jumped over one of Councillor Morgan's points. How's the working relationship with county going?
So yeah, so obviously we're working very closely with the county on the Future High Streets Fund bid. I think obviously in terms of some of the points you've raised around the state of the pavements, I know obviously our officers speak to their officers. I'm not going to, I'm here with a district council hat on, but obviously I am a county councillor, and I know as Councillor Stokes as well, and the county councillors do have regular meetings with the highways teams, with the economic development officers to look at Grantham, and you do go on regular walkabouts as well to highlight some of the issues. But the easiest thing I've found is that, fix my streets. I know I've got a fantastic team in Stamford, whether that's some of the town councillors or the civic society, that literally go around the town photographing every single crack on the pavement, and that's then submitted, and we then see the work being undertaken. But we do have a good working relationship with them.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, I think we've made a few requests there for our next. Councillor Griffin.
Just be cheeky. On Sunday, I went to Southall or Southall, whichever you want to call it, Minster. And perhaps for some of the signage, instead of it always being up high so that you don't always see it or whatever, they'd actually got pieces carved out into huge paving slabs, and you could follow your way around. And it also did it so that it followed the history of the Minster. Expensive, but in some areas it might be quite nice just to put a little bit, just so you don't have to keep looking up, looking down, finding a piece of paper.
I think that comes back to our point about parallels that we're aspiring. So it'd be useful to see sort of parallels, a common strategy, and some more definitions of success in future reports. But other than that, I'm content with the recommendations. Is there anybody wanting to have a vote on the recommendations? It's just that this comes back to us within 12 months. I think we're all content with that. Okay, so let's make some progress. Thank you for that report. The local item 8, the local authority search figures. This is with Graham Watts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an update report to this committee following a report on this issue back in September 2001, where at the paragraph 1.2 of the report states that the average search was at a 22-day average, and at its highest reached 32 days. I'm very pleased to report that since that meeting, we have significantly improved performance in land charges. If you look at paragraph 1.3, you can see from September to February, we're way below the 10-day target that we set as an authority. It's probably useful to the committee to know that some external resource was put into the team to address that significant backlog. That ceased in December. So since December, the team consists of 2 full-time equivalent posts, and it was identified at that point that there is an issue with regard to the resourcing of that team. So a bid was put in place as part of the council's budget setting for an additional resource in that team. That additional resource is currently just closed in terms of recruitment, and we'll be undertaking interviews for 1.5 full-time equivalent posts as part of the land charges team to address the resourcing issue. You'll see that March, the turnaround times have exceeded the target of 10 days. I think that is due to annual leave within the team. Obviously, with 2 full-time equivalents in the team, there's not the contingency there that there should be, and that's why we've put that additional budget in place to address that as part of the team. And also, March did see a spike in the number of searches received by the team as well. But I'm very confident that once we get the team properly resourced, that performance will continue to be improved. And on average, or even if you look at the quarterly or an annual performance, I think you'll see that we will be below the 10-day target. I've got no further update to make on that report, Chairman, but if any member has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, any comments and questions on this report from the committee? Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I'd just like to say congratulations for such a turnaround. I mean, from 32 days, to 4 days in January, that's just remarkable. So congratulations for the effort to everyone involved in that. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments from the committee? Okay, I would like to echo those comments as well. Well done. Yeah, it's a terrific turnaround. That's exactly where we should be. You just mentioned some external resource. How long did we have external resources to bring this back to where we needed it to be? Graham Watts?
I think that was put in place in September, and then that was withdrawn in December.
Okay,
it's
so
a few
3 months.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. If there are no further comments on that, does there anybody want to, looking at the recommendations, does anybody need, require us to continue monitoring of this? I'm certainly content that the team are on top of this. Okay, so I think that I don't think we need any further monitoring of this, but again, congratulations, Graham, and to the team for doing that. Let's make some progress then. Item 9, the work programme. Does anybody have any comments for Councillor Johnson and myself for the work programme? Councillor Knowles?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think at the last, or maybe the last but one of these meetings, we were talking about monitoring the budget and monitoring the performance during the course of the year. And obviously that's in the work programme. But I think at that time, both you and I commented on getting some sort of performance measurement during the course of the year, not just at the end of the year. We look at the budget, we make a budget, and then at the end of the year we say, well, we missed that, we got that, we didn't do that, whatever. And I think the late lamented Ken Lyon, was it like Mr. Lyon, who said, yes, they would prepare some interim targets for us to look at this committee, and I've not seen any yet. So can we, before the next meeting, get some understanding of where they expect to be at various parts of the year so that we can monitor it and measure the performance more accurately? Thank you.
I think we were commenting on the on some of the higher level budget monitoring issues, but certainly Councillor Johnson, I can talk to you about that as to how we can report those. Are there any other comments for the work programme? As I say, Councillor Johnson and I will take any comments at any time. Obviously, we're heading into a new council year, so any comments or anything for the work programme, please don't hesitate to contact Councillor Johnson and myself. Okay, moving on. Item 10. Are there any other items of business in the room? No, so that's 11:45. I'll bring this meeting to a close. Thank you everyone for your attendance.